Leader Smith, welcome back.
Thanks, glad to be back.
Okay, I recently interviewed both the Speaker and the President. And President Gates, I asked him, how was it between the two of you in terms of a good working relationship? And he had some very nice things to say about the relationship, the communication, and so forth. You have a chance to reciprocate.
Well, I mean, it's a great relationship because Don Gates is a person without an agenda. His agenda is basically making sure Florida prospers and keeps going, better. He's not looking at any of the offices or anything, so that gives him a different perspective. We communicate often. He eats in the Democratic office. He comes down to get our food. He never chips in on the food, but he comes down and eat with us a lot. And even, I'll be in committee and he'll come by the committee, pull me out, and we'll go over something to make sure we're on the same page. So, so far it's been a great communication, but we've had that for a number of years now, both knowing that we were going into leadership. We communicated often, before now, and we realize how important it is now that as majority party and minority party, we keep at least communication around. So if we disagree, we just disagree without being disagreeable.
You've served as Democratic leader of the House,
Yes.
Now the Senate. How would you characterize the differences between the two jobs?
It's a little different. The House was more hand-holding in the House when I was leader. I had freshmen, people that had never been to Tallahassee, who were just there, and it was more teaching them the process. Well, in the Senate, every one of my members have served before, and so no one's new to the rodeo. Now it's more just, massaging, egos and making sure that everyone, is doing things and that we're still on the same page in the Senate. People are a little more boisterous and they have their opinions because they've been here for a while and been through the battles, but just making sure in the Senate we're on the same page and at least speaking from the same playbook. So it's different. I'm less teaching, but more managing when it comes to the Senate.
You and the House Democratic leader, Representative Perry Thurston, you guys are almost neighbors, and you've known each other most all your lives. You ran against each other, and he claims that he won, but you obviously know that you won, but you've really been good friends,
Yes.
and I would think that Broward County is thrilled to have two Democratic leaders coming out of one place.
And I think the word you use is important. We're friends. I mean, even beyond this process, if I'm home on a Thursday night, my phone rings, hey, what you doing? Let's go catch a game or let's go do this. I mean, we actually hang out together. And so it keeps the lines of communications together. And so when legislation comes up that's going through the House, we'll talk about it. I'll get a call and say, hey, we're trying to get this amendment on in the House. Can you guys work on it in the Senate? And at least try, keep the communication together because we actually hang out together. We actually like each other.
Okay, let's talk about some issues. One of your top priorities has been to make changes in the so-called stand your ground law in Florida. As an attorney, why do you think this law is fundamentally flawed?
Well, we do a couple of things within the law that are unique. First, we'd say to law enforcement that you cannot detain someone that's suspected of a crime. What the law says is if someone claims stand your ground, we said you can't arrest them. But then we did a unique thing in that under the definition of arrest, they said detain. So fundamentally, if a officer comes up on the scene and one person's dead and one person's alive and says, I was standing my ground, under Florida statute, the plain reading of the statute, that law enforcement officer can't even detain the person. They just got to let them walk away. I mean, can't set them in the car while they check footage or something like that. So, I mean, that's a fundamental flaw within the law.
You're saying that if a person tells an officer, with somebody lying there, I was simply acting in self-defense,
Yes.
under that law, the officer has no choice but not to detain him. Is that what you're saying?
The law says, Florida statute says you can't arrest. And under the definition of arrest is the word detain. Florida law says that. Now, those that are adverse to changing stand your ground or saying we shouldn't touch it, once you explain that fundamental flaw in it, it's almost universal. They're saying, well, yeah, police should be able to detain. So, I mean, that's one change I'm trying to do. Another change I'm trying to do is at least track the use of this law. prior to the Sanford incident, it was very rarely used. A lot of people didn't know about it. But now, since the Sanford incident, defense attorneys are using it in ways you couldn't even imagine. So what I've tried to do is get FDLE to at least track the use through the courts and through law enforcement, track the use of this law. It's being used in drug cases, whereas if a fight breaks out and the officer arrests someone, and subsequent to arresting them, they find drugs in the car or something, the person said, well, you know what, I was standing my ground. And under stand your ground, you can't even arrest me or detain me. So those drugs you found have to be excluded. It's being used in schoolyard fights.
Is it being successfully used?
Yes.
Maybe used, but...
It's being successfully used. In courthouse today, as we speak, there's someone in a courthouse in Florida using a stand your ground hearing to exclude something or do something that wasn't the real intent of the legislature. So what I've asked in the legislation that I filed, Senate Bill 136, is to track the use for at least 2 years, so then we can go back and see how the law is being perverted and go ahead and make changes as necessary. And the last thing, the third thing that I've thought that we should do is, if you're the aggressor, if you pick a fight, if you start the fight, if you take the fight to someone, you shouldn't be able to use stand your ground and all those presumptions. Just use a strict self-defense. Not saying if you start a fight, you can't defend yourself, but at least with a strict self-defense, then you have a jury look and see whether your actions were reasonable under the circumstances. You don't bypass the court and everything. That's only if you're the aggressor. If you are leaving the FSU game and a Gator fan gets in your face or something like that, you shouldn't be able to use stand your ground when you started the fight.
Okay, you felt so strongly about this that you formed a task force of some very distinguished folks, and you had some meetings, and you came up with your own, the task force came up with some recommendations. At the same time all that was happening, Governor Scott formed a task force headed by then Lieutenant Governor Jennifer Carroll, and they came out with some recommendations. I'm hearing, when I talk to people over in the legislature, that not much is going to happen legislatively this year. Is that your reading? And if that's so, why?
Well, first, the task force were formed at different times. When the incident first happened, my constituents and many Floridians had a lot of questions about this stand your ground. And there were a lot of questions. And so I asked Governor Scott to start a task force and let's look at this law. And he said, well, I'll wait till the end of the court case. Well, as you know, cases can drag on for years. And so instead of waiting on him, I convened a task force in South Florida with people from every side, Republicans, Democrats, state attorneys, public defenders, judges, people for and against it. And we met and came up with recommendations, and the three that I spoke about before are the three that we all pretty much agreed on. Now, there were some that wanted outright get rid of stand your ground. There were some that wanted to keep it. So those three were the ones that were, got the most attention everyone could pretty much coalesce on. After my task force, we came out with recommendations. Then the governor finally convened his task force, and not much recommendations came from it, because right now in the state of Florida, a lot of people are they just feel that the law is needed. People are fed up with being scared. A lot of people feel that, hey, if I'm tired of being scared. If someone comes to me, I should be able to stand my ground. And because of that, legislators are reluctant to even tackle the issue because they don't want to be misinterpreted. They don't want a constituent saying, oh, you voted against stand your ground or something. So there's sad to say, there's a reluctance to even discuss it because they don't want their actions misinterpreted by their constituents. I understand their fear, but I'm pushing for us to do something because it's the right thing to do. Okay,
let's talk more generally about guns, gun violence, school safety. Do you expect any meaningful, from your perspective, gun legislation this session that changes Florida law in any respect? No. Why?
For the same reason I said. I mean, members on both sides of the aisle are afraid of their constituents misinterpreting what they're doing. We all can agree that there's some things that need to be done. 9 out of 10 Floridians agree that background checks should be strengthened. But you have members of the legislature that are afraid to step out there. They're afraid of their constituents. They're afraid of the NRA giving them a primary and things like that. So they're afraid to even broach the subject. And so a lot of the bills that have been found, even though no matter how small and not earth-shattering legislation, they're not being brought up because of the conversation may get some people in trouble, and a vote may be misinterpreted by their constituents. And that's sad in this day that, people are afraid to really vote and do the right thing. I mean, it's a sad commentary of where we are as a society now, that people are so afraid of a 24-hour news cycle and blogs and everything else, and they may be misinterpreted, so they're even avoiding the conversation.
All right, let's move to a similar subject, school safety, okay? That often evolves into a discussion of gun safety. But have you heard any ideas that people, your constituents and others, might say, that's a good idea, that would make our schools safer?
Well, Senator Eleanor Sobel convened the task force in Broward County after the shooting in Connecticut. And one idea that she came up with, and that she's filed legislation she's trying to work, is a dedicated funding source, giving local option to, say, tax yourself a penny or a portion of a mill, so you can have an officer in every school in a community. So communities can make their own decisions and say, okay, well, we think it's an issue here, and we want to tax ourselves an extra penny or something that will go strictly towards school resource officers, one in each school. In some communities that don't think it's necessary, they don't have to do it. So that's one idea. To be a local choice. And then you can even decide how you want it. I mean, there's some communities where, you may need an officer in every school, but there's some communities where, schools are so small and so close together, one officer can keep vigilance over all three. So it gives local choice, and that's an interesting idea that Senator Sobel came up with.